Welcome to our latest Hippocratic Adventures chat, where we talk about everything related to practicing medicine abroad. I'm your host, Dr. Ashwini Bapat. I'm a palliative care doctor trained in the US, now living in Portugal. If you haven't already, make sure to sign up for our weekly email newsletter. This is where we share inspiring stories, job opportunities, and strategies to help you move abroad. You can sign up now at hippocraticadventures.com/subscribe. Today, I'm here with Dr. Sarat Munjuluri. Dr. Sarat Munjuluri is a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and prior to entering medical school, he was an elementary school teacher and high school guidance counselor for about 10 years. First of all, that's amazing. When he finished training in 2022, he and his family, his spouse, 2 children, and pets, moved to Mexico City. He is now back stateside working in academia, but he is here to share with us what that experience was like in Mexico. So before we get started, smash that subscribe button, sit back, and enjoy. So tell us your story. How did you end up in Mexico? Take us back to that time.
Okay. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely.
So again, since you know what it's like to be with a shrink, maybe you'll be okay with it's a little meandering. So we wound up there because I really enjoyed traveling. I thought to me it produced a different sense of myself. Like I thought of myself differently, and that first sort of came out through as a child, but mostly I think it came out when I was in college and I spent a semester in Spain. And there, so this was like a long time ago, it was in the year 2000. And I was in Valencia, which is it was a great city to be in, but they did not have a lot of, South Indians or South Asians in the city at the time. And so I stuck out like a sore thumb. And, I had some of that growing up. I grew up in a community where we were a minority and we faced some racism. But I think what was different there was that while it was very apparent and obvious, and there were, pretty intense incidents of racism as well, I found that people were very curious as well and very open and interested. And I made some really wonderful friends. And I think that contrast between the two made me very much more curious about my own sense of identity and sense of self. And so then the next piece that kind of came in was that after I started teaching, I met my wife through there, and she found a job at an American school in Mexico when our kind of teaching contract ran out. And I was too scared to say yes. So I turned it down and I regretted it. And that stuck with me. And then as we switched careers and then we had kids, it sort of seemed more complicated, but I thought about that and I said, I don't want to go through that again. And I want to make this a priority. So through residency, I started looking into, well, what would it be like as soon as I'm done with training to move abroad? So the idea had been in my mind for some time, and then we decided, hey, let's just do it. This seemed like, no, there was never going to be a better time, so we did it then.
That's amazing. And so why Mexico, though? Was it because of that earlier instance where you said no?
Sort of. That was certainly in our minds. But actually, the easiest place to find work as a psychiatrist was in New Zealand, which I think you probably know. And that's where I kind of got information at first as a resident. And I wound up applying for jobs there, and I got accepted to one. And it seemed really great. But what I thought about and what was clear was that it would have to be a commitment to make it work financially, and then also for our family. So on the order of a few years, essentially, for us to feel like, okay, well, this was worth the time and money investment. And at the time, so this is 2022, the country was still on lockdown and quarantined. And while I kind of figured that was going to end, um, we thought like, well, what are the chances then of family coming to visit? What are the chances vice versa, that we would be able to easily go visit them? And so it didn't add up perfectly. And so then we started thinking about, well, what other options exist? And at the time, it seemed like there was a possibility to work remotely, kind of digital nomad. And so then we thought about, well, what other countries exist, right? If the world is kind of our oyster. And then we thought, well, Mexico was a place that we missed out on before. Andrew and I had visited Mexico City, and really loved it. And then two pieces of things came in. One, my brother and actually a friend I met from studying abroad, they had both spent significant time there, and that friend had lived in Mexico City for several years. And so we talked together and we thought, okay, well, this is like a really, is going to be a good fit. And it wound up being, pretty close to, we're in Texas. So it was pretty close to be able to get home if there was an emergency or things like that.
Well, very cool. What's really interesting about what you shared was that you had this experience earlier on where your wife had an opportunity in Mexico and you didn't take it and you regretted it. And that actually resonated with me because so in college, I went to McGill in Canada and they also had a study abroad program and I wanted to do it so badly. I wanted to do it in Spain. But in the end, I decided not to because if I took that study abroad position, it would have delayed my graduation by a year. And I remember talking it over with my parents, and they were like, no, you have to do college in 4 years. And so I didn't take it. And at the end, I was like, why didn't I do that? That would have been like this amazing experience. And I do think that that definitely fed into part of the reason why like since that point onwards, I looked for like global health type opportunities where I could be outside the US and have that experience. And so I definitely think
Yeah.
that played a part into why we moved abroad as well. And I also loved how you originally started your search and you looked at one place and then you ended up in a second place, And I feel like we did that too. We literally also, we were looking in like New Zealand, we looked in Saipan, we looked at Guam, we were looking like all over the place. And it's kind of that journey that then brings you to like this other place that you hadn't really considered initially. So that's very cool. And so when you moved then to Mexico City, like you were just graduating residency then. So what did that feel like? The rest of the like your co-residents, what were they doing and what was their response to you choosing kind of this different path?
As you probably well know, most everyone was moving into either an academic job or some sort of stable, outpatient type work. And so this didn't make a lot of sense, at least in that narrative. But I felt comfortable enough with that it didn't bother me per se. Um, with kids, I knew I needed financial stability, and I think that weighed on me of like, okay, well, we're taking this kind of risk and we don't have a lot of clarity. But I didn't. One of the other things that has always been on my mind is like, well, I'm going to be practicing medicine for many years. So what's the rush? Like, I don't need to rush to get settled into some job that I would just be doing for another year afterwards, or 2 or 3 or 10 or 15. So I felt excited by that. And to a certain extent, it's kind of nice to be like, okay, well, I'm trying to find my own path here, and to then have conversations and meet people who are like-minded, which was really, I think, like it made me excited.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so in moving to Mexico, did you have a practice? Did you start a practice? What did you do to make that move possible?
So I actually think I'm certain that I emailed you and Emmerich at some point during this process to try to see what this was like. I did not feel comfortable starting a private practice, in part because I wasn't sure how long would be there. And, like at some point, a big thing was like I needed to pay off my medical school loans. And so at some point I was going to likely work in a job where I qualified for that. And that was going to take up a big space of my schedule. And so I think like trying to build this huge private practice and then scale it down didn't make a lot of sense to me, but I did have some conversations with private practice doctors who were maybe interested in splitting things up or giving me a portion of the work. But I mostly tried to settle on, hey, is there some sort of, group model where they were comfortable with me working from abroad? And that needle was difficult to thread, even in the time of like, kind of looser COVID restrictions. And so it took a long time, but I tried to be really transparent about this when I interviewed for positions for telework, saying like, hey, you know what, I'm going to be abroad. What concerns do you have about that? Does the malpractice cover me regardless of location? What are your concerns if I did do this? And I didn't want to try to hide anything. So I was able to make it work. And one of the companies has like been super supportive. And it was really nice, actually. It's like when you do find someone there, they understand why. And they're like, oh, this is great. I would have, this is exactly what I would have wanted to do. I'm glad you're doing it. But there was always a level of uncertainty that went into it. And I think that was one of the continual stressors that we experienced there that was very frustrating of like, well, is this work going to collapse at any point because maybe a policy has changed or the DEA rules have changed or something like that. And so that was part of the reason why we kind of understood, well, this was going to be somewhat temporary. We didn't have clear plans. There was nothing like, we're going to be here 1 year or 6 months or something like that. We thought we would take it as it came, but we sort of understood like, well, probably if it's going to be long term, we'd have to do a different plan in order to do it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I actually, you know what, now that you share the story, I do remember you messaging me to find out some more. So in the end then, so you moved to Mexico with your 2 kids and sounds like your pets and your spouse.
Yeah.
How did that transition go for your kids? I don't know how old they were.
Yeah.
I would say even your pet. I don't know if
Yeah.
like across the border in a car or something.
Yeah, so actually that was one of the other things about New Zealand too, was like you have to quarantine pets there. And we have one of our cats is old, he's 18. And so we were sort of concerned on what that would be like. Actually I watched one of the other videos you had and about this, and our kids hated the idea. So they never were interested in it. We thought we were ruining their lives on purpose. They were 7 and 9 at the time, and our older one, 9, is a girl. The younger one, 7, is a boy. Now they're 11 and 9. And we did take them to Mexico City like 6 months before we moved. And we thought, hey, we can introduce this. We can look at some schools, have you get used to this. And they knew that we had an agenda, and they were super resistant to it the whole time. They actively, were not going to have an open mind about it. And then like, it was just when we love doing things the hard way. My wife got sick, like got a GI bug when we were traveling around trying to, so she was kind of under the weather and we knew that, but we were trying to power through. But then I also got sick and I didn't realize it. And so we were on the subway, the metro, and I passed out. Like I was standing up and then I passed. The next thing I woke up, I remember was there was a police officer over me. I was outside the train. So the introduction, and it turned out to be fine. Like everyone was super caring and nice. But the introduction my kids had was like, a total disaster because they didn't speak any Spanish. So it's like, here they are in a foreign country. Their dad's being watched over by a police officer. Their mom's vomiting on the side. Like how is this going to be a good idea? But one of the things that was important to us was another motivation to do it was like in my own conceptualization of being a parent, I knew that I had a hard time kind of being authoritative, I should say. So like it's easier for me. I don't think I'm super permissive, but I do like to really engage my kids in decision making, making sure they feel like they're empowered. And but the flip side of that is I think it was been hard for me to say like, no, we're doing this because I know it's the right thing to do. And this was, I think, the most meaningful, impactful decision we had along those lines. And through COVID, what I definitely saw was that everyone, all of us in the family, felt that the anxiety creeping in of saying like we wanted more control than we actually had of circumstances. And I think for kids, a 7 and a 9-year-old, like that's pretty problematic, right? Because it's very difficult for them to understand, well, actually you don't have control over this. It feels like you do. So, I kind of assessed that was part of the reason that they were super resistant, is they wanted more agency and ultimately be able to reason their way out of going. And so it was like a really good lesson in parenting to be like, no, we're doing this. Like, we believe this is the right thing to do, even though you think the evidence is there that it's not. So we did it. And, I think one of the terrible ironies of the immigration system in America, right, is like, it's just super easy for American citizens to go to Mexico. To be like a permanent resident is a little different. You have to show assets and things like that, which we didn't have. But to go on a tourist visa, you just show up and you get 6 months. So we showed up with like bags in hand and our pets, and we flew over, and it was pretty simple, right? Obviously, the immigration officers were like, but we had proof that we were staying in an Airbnb for a little bit, and we weren't going to stay for forever. At least, we didn't make any suggestions of that. So we settled in. We knew that like that was going to be 30 days to kind of figure things out, to look at schools. And we searched around we had not a lot of recommendations, but we just kind of Googled it and then walked around the neighborhoods to find. And we found a school that was a really good fit. And then we were able to extend out a place, and then we kind of settled in, which was great.
That's amazing. And so when your kids actually then transitioned to that school, was that a local like Mexican public school? What was it in Spanish then? Or yeah, can you tell us about that?
It was no, it was a private school. And I think like that was basically the option for us. And it was a dual language school. So half the day was in English and half the day was in Spanish. And we lived in a neighborhood called Coyoacan. And what I really loved about that was that it was neighborhoody. There are other parts of Mexico City that are very, Coyoacan has a lot of tourists too, but is definitely like catered towards young urban professionals, let's say. And so it could feel a little bit more transient. But at our school, our kids were actually the only foreign-born students there. And what I thought was so beautiful about that experience, and I still like, it's just so meaningful to me to this day, is that they treated them as special for being different and celebrated. And the parents, the administration, the teachers, they really made all of us feel like we were welcome and cared for, and the kids too. So while they struggled, of course, like, half the day they didn't know what was going on, they immediately had people who were willing to reach out. And none of the kids spoke English fluently. So they had an active interest in trying to learn how to talk to our kids too, which helped, right? Because then like the parents had good reason to try to befriend us.
Yeah.
And so it was just a really magnificent experience. And I think that's one of those things like, okay, I'm a psychiatrist, right? Growing up here, I found it to be very difficult to feel like I was celebrated for being different. And in fact, often I felt the opposite. And that's not always true. It's not universally true. But I think for my kids to have that experience, I hope that they can remember that down the road, and I'll remind them of that. but what it was like to feel like, yeah, I was really, really celebrated for that. And I think that was, that was worth it more than anything.
Yeah. I think that's an incredibly powerful experience, both for you to see how
Yeah.
people responded to your kids, but for your kids to experience as well. Because to be different at that age and to enter a new school where like half the time you don't know what's going
Yeah.
on, that's incredibly scary. And to be welcomed is such a dramatically like nurturing response. As
Yeah.
opposed to I can imagine what that similar situation, the opposite in the US, like I've definitely witnessed it
Mm.
both in my elementary school, middle school, that experience is very unpleasant for anyone that's coming from outside of the US to then not know English very well for a child and very much have been excluded or bullied or whatever. I wouldn't say welcomed is the word. Welcomed is not the word I would choose for what I've seen. So I think that's actually a very unique experience and a very unique response for a community and a school to have. Hey, are you wondering how you too can move abroad? Then make sure to download our completely free cheat sheet, which walks you through the 3 steps to kickstart your own adventure. Download it now at hippocraticadventures.com/subscribe.
I think it's a testament to them, but also it's like, okay, we have obviously a lot of privilege as in my role now, or in my shoes. So one part of this was like, well, yeah, shouldn't I take advantage of that? And particularly when it comes to like what we were seeing in our kids and how they were struggling, and we were struggling too post COVID, while we were all in therapy and getting treatment with medications and stuff. One of the things was like, well, if we have the privilege to be able to shake things up and experience a world that's outside of ours, and I had a reasonable idea based on my own background of like that's useful and that's really valuable. Why not do that? That's why we have this opportunity. So that was also really amazing, to do that and not just kind of stand by the sidelines and hope that things get better.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. And so, what were some of the challenges that you experienced in spending that time in Mexico City for you, your family? What was that like?
So there were some, like just logistical things, right? Like in terms of work, right? Doing telework um, I had this sense of uncertainty, and I spent a lot more time than I wanted to, just making sure that like work wouldn't cave out and we could pay bills. And we didn't need a lot of money to get by, but we needed some, and I was the only source of income. So there was more time than I wanted to spend on that. And I think not even just time, but emotional energy. And so it took several months for me to really adjust to being relaxed, which was part of the point. Like, residency and fellowship were hard, and I wanted to be able to reset. And it took a long time to do that. There wasn't a sense of ease, and like we still had tension for a while. And I was hoping and expecting for that to be more fast.
Yeah.
Another thing was like comparing to what this experience was like as a 20-year-old in college and trying to get that out of my head, because like that was a totally different phase of life, right? One of the things that I did when I was in Spain was like, I didn't speak any English. I tried not to. And so I was able to learn the language more quickly. And that was really awesome. But also like the internet didn't exist really then. So it was a lot easier to do that. And so I think the conceptualization I had of like, well, actually, as a parent now, we've had like multiple things to do. It's not like you still kind of want like, if my wife and I were just trying to purely speak in Spanish, it's like we wouldn't be able to communicate on basic levels. So we had to kind of give up that idea. So that was another, I think that was hard to do. Mexico is a place of inequity, and like that, it's very clear. And so I think, reflecting on the privileges we had going there, I think was something that I would try to be mindful of. But quite honestly, most of it was just fantastic. Like it was so amazing. And what I remember the most are these beautiful, rich experiences and having leisure time. And we're living in a society where, you know, we had the opportunity to relax. So like one of the things I really reflect on now is grocery shopping, right? Because I had a schedule where it was like I was working part-time, working kind of when I wanted to. We had the luxury of going grocery shopping at like 12 o'clock on a Tuesday or Thursday. And the journey to the grocery store was so beautiful, right? And one of the things I really enjoy doing is stumbling on things. And that's a beautiful place to do it because it's like crowded and chaotic, but it's green and beautiful. And so I remember one time I was walking home from the grocery store and like I had a lot of heavy stuff on me and I put my bags down in a square, and a Scottish band came out and started doing bagpipes. And it's like I'm in the middle of Mexico. They're clearly like, this doesn't make sense. It's totally absurd. But that was the beauty of it, right? And the weather's beautiful there, like year round. So like it just was like, this is what I want to do. Like I don't have to rush home and get to something. And so that sense of leisureliness is so fantastic. And so it's hard to think of all these challenges, I have to say.
So that's amazing though, because obviously there were challenges in moving there, but it sounds like the joys, the experiences you had pretty much outweighed them. Because even a simple trip to a grocery store brings you so much joy.
Yeah.
A day on a Tuesday, that's incredible, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's really incredible. Were there other things that really stood out about that experience for you?
So there are two things that come to my mind. One is at the end of the school year, our kids, like the whole school did kind of like a dance celebration where they actually, like pretty impressive. They choreographed routines to like based on your grade to specific songs and things like that. And the production value was like really super impressive. So by that point, our kids had integrated in, right? So they had friends, they were able to communicate without really any problems in Spanish. And so first of all, it was just amazing to see, right? In 12 months to go to be able to like, have friends and communicate without an issue. But, then to sit in the audience and to watch that brought such joy. And like, there's also like, that was the thing I was looking for that I have from Spain. I was like, oh, I'm actually integrated in. And I felt like just part of the community. And I think that's one of the beautiful things if you do this experience with children who are relatively young, although it's logistically super complicated and difficult, and you wonder whether they're going to remember it or not. It's also kind of like, well, you're doing it for you. And in my mind, there's no better way to quickly connect to community than through having relatively young kids, because you have to, right? And so you can feel much more integrated, much more quickly. So that was one piece. Then we like went on vacation with some of them later on. And like it was totally it was like we were vacationing with friends here in America, right? And like to have that happen so quickly was amazing. And then my brother came down a few times because he loved living there or being there. And we went on a train journey that started in Sinaloa and went through Chihuahua, like through these canyons. It's called the Copper Canyons. And there's a tourist train, which is just spectacular, but it goes through the canyon. The canyon itself is like bigger than the Grand Canyon, is wider, but it's not touristed, in part because there's like a lot of there's some legitimate concerns, but a lot of misconceptions, like, oh, it's a dangerous place, right? But by then we kind of knew enough to know how to be savvy. And so we at some point we had like a hotel basically to ourselves on the edge of a canyon. And it was just so beautiful, right? And then we like went on a guided tour and a hike of the canyons themselves. And we went to a Raramuri community, and they're the people who they're kind of well known now for that book of like long distance running that came out. And a lot of these those shoes, that are like that vibrant shoe. Yeah. So I think a lot of that came from them, where they're running like sandals and stuff. So we went to a community there and saw that. It was like just things that were off the beaten track, that you could do it with intention, but part of this experience was like we didn't have to. We could just kind of stumble upon these. It was so incredible. And again, it's like when the packed schedule in America, it's so hard to do. You have to fight for vacation, and that did not exist there. And I love that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think one of the other things about having had time to live in a place for a year is that you get to visit the places that you wouldn't visit if you were just there as a tourist, right? Like as a tourist, you're going to visit certain things because you want to see what Mexico City has to offer, but you probably wouldn't take this kind of trip that's a little bit off the beaten path. And so I think when you actually live there, you have the time and space to explore these smaller, it sounds like it was a big
Yeah.
tent,
Yeah,
but other venues. And it's true, like moving with younger kids, it forces you to integrate, it forces you to talk to the other parents, forces you to get to know them. And I just feel like there's such a great ticket to like meeting people. And it balances out the challenges of having young kids and moving with them.
Totally. Yeah, I agree with that.
So any advice, for a physician, wherever they are in their journey, who is considering an experience abroad, like any words of wisdom from someone who has been through the experience, moved with their family, enjoyed this incredibly rich, it sounds like, experience in Mexico. What would you say to a fellow physician?
Well, I suspect if someone's, watching or this video and on your website that they have some idea of this anyway, right? So it's like, how do you recognize that and value that in yourself and cultivate that? Because you have that light and that's there for a reason. And the other piece is that I have a friend from college who went to med school directly, whereas obviously I took a different path. And so she's been very valuable in terms of advice. And one thing she told me is like, oh, well, there's a misconception in medicine. You have to be really intelligent to be a doctor, but really it's about hard work and delayed gratification, which I think is true. But that delayed gratification piece, I think, can really stick when it comes to something like this. Like, oh, there will be a better time, or I will be in a better spot. It will make more sense down the road, because that's part of what we're kind of indoctrinated to do and think. And I don't know if I buy that, at least when it comes to like things that are super important to your identity and your value set. I think you need to honor those and act on them.
That is such a great point. I don't think I thought about now that you mention it, yes, there's a lot of delayed gratification in medicine. I don't think I thought of it that way, but actually now it makes a lot of sense the way some of my colleagues responded when I kind of shared that we were going to be moving abroad. They actually told me like, that's something you can do on sabbatical once you earn your sabbatical after like 10 years. That's something you can do on retirement or partial retirement. And obviously retirement partial is a very long way away for me. So I actually think like, oh, I wonder if that was the mindset they were coming from when they even shared some of that advice. So that's so interesting that you talk about the delayed gratification aspect and how like if moving abroad or an experience abroad is really important to you, I think honoring that is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and I've seen that come through in other physicians you've interviewed, in some one way or the other, right? Like, there's nothing that's going to directly say outright, like, yes, go, like this is the right thing right now, unless you come to this website, I guess. And so why is that? I guess questioning like, what is it about the culture there?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really fantastic point. It's so interesting. I don't think I ever thought about medicine and delayed gratification, but
Huh.
yeah, that is definitely what you're groomed to experience, I think. There's a lot of sacrifices you make when you choose a career in medicine, and part of those sacrifices are like the personal sacrifices you make for your family, or not being at a bunch of weddings, or not taking part in certain celebrations because you're on call or whatever it is. So I actually now I feel like I understand better why some of my colleagues responded the way they did when I mentioned that we were moving abroad. Like many of them did tell me like, oh, maybe that's something you can do later on in your career. Maybe you
Mm.
do like global health and you develop that as like your niche or
Right, right.
something. Um, and I was like, I tried it. Like I genuinely did. I remember like I tried like every global health opportunity that presented itself, but I felt like, I don't know, like this is awesome. Like this is very cool, but it's not quite me yet. So
Huh.
that's
Do you mind if I ask, like, was that because something in you wanted different than it connecting specifically to a career? I think that was me too. Is like I didn't care really that much about the work of medicine. I wanted to live abroad with my kids and have that experience.
like the way that I guess I felt like work and my career were not priority number one, two, and three for
Mm.
me. Like
Yeah,
for my colleagues, it was. For
yeah,
my colleagues, they really wanted to become professor in whatever track they were. And so when they were talking to me, they were like, look, if you want to do like this global thing, do global health and make that your career. And that was their priority. But for me, like work, I love it. Like I love palliative care. It just wasn't like my only identity.
yeah.
And I think I realized like I want to do this work, but I also kind of just want to enjoy living. But that's the thing about palliative care. It's like you realize how
Right,
precious it
right.
is to actually
Yeah,
be able to enjoy living. And so I think that's where I was like, I don't know if I want to do a global health track just because I have this like interest to live abroad. Why don't I just live abroad? Or have an experience abroad and then see how like work comes into it, you know? So I think my
yeah.
priority was just a little different. And I think that's why it didn't seem to resonate very well where I was.
Yeah, I can certainly connect with that. I think one of the hard things about being a quote unquote non-traditional was just that, like I similarly value what I do, but I didn't necessarily come in thinking that this was going to be encompassing of who I was. And I think that's where it's been painful and hard is, that's what medicine requires at times, frequently. But then also when it came to job selection too, it also didn't make sense to me of like why I'm picking a career that's like going to be all encompassing. It's not what I want, right? Um, and that can be, I think that's hard in, the way that we're all cultivated in training.
No, 100%. I also think about like our identity as a physician in the US is so ingrained in you. Like the first thing that you are a physician first. And like I remember any dinner party, any birthday party I went to in the US, the first question you're asked,
Right.
hi, I'm Ashwini. What do you do for work?
Yeah, right.
And then it's like your profession becomes your identity. And that's it. I'm just a palliative care doc. But I feel like what's been really cool is like having this experience outside the US. No one like has ever in the 4 years asked me what I do for work. Like it will come up naturally in a conversation, but no one has actually outright in the first minute of meeting me been like, and what do you do
Oh
for
yeah. Right, right.
like their understanding of me is not based on my profession. Their understanding of me is based on like what I enjoy talking about, what I enjoy doing, or whatever it is. And that's actually been really refreshing because in moving abroad, I kind of chose a less traditional career option, I would say.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and it actually gave me the space to not have to constantly define who I am by what I do. I could
yeah.
just be and explore what I wanted to do. Um, and so
Huh.
that's been like a really pleasant cultural
Great.
change,
Yeah.
I would say.
So some of that shift that we experienced too, just by moving out, right?
Yeah,
Like you got to change your circumstances a little bit to see how culture is different.
yeah.
I mean, within medicine, if I like one soapbox thing that's been really troublesome to me is my family, like my parents were secretaries. So I didn't have a lot of understanding of what medicine was like. And so I had the fortune of going to med school that was pretty close to where we lived. But for residency, um, I got matched to a place where we had to move, like my parents, me, kids, and pets. And that was like one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. Other than my first kid being born, that was the most traumatic experience I can remember. And it made me like, oh, well, medicine requires you to be a nomad. Like there's this expectation that you move. But then it's like, if you want to be the nomad, that's different. Then they're like, no, you can't do that.
You,
So I thought that irony there has always been something that's like that troubled me.
yeah, that's so true. I mean, the you can't do that. I think I've heard that so many times. And it used to like really just throughout like early post residency, post fellowship, like every time I wanted to do something slightly different, the response of you can't do that pissed me off so much. And yeah, then when we shared we were moving abroad, like all of my mentors were like, you can't do that. You do that as a sabbatical, you do that in retirement, maybe you do like a leave for a month or something, but you can't just up and leave. And I'm like, I don't know why I can't, but
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Anyway.
yes, so Dr. Sarat Munjuluri, thank you so much for sharing your experience, for sharing what prompted you to move to Mexico, what that experience was like, how your family made the transition, and what you've really gotten out of it, and the memories that have stuck with you since then.
Thank you for inviting me and being, communicating with me over the last couple of years. It's been really great.
Well, it's been wonderful, and keep us posted on where your journey takes you next. We're always happy to hear updates or anything that's happening. So with that, we wrap up another episode of Discovering Where Your White Coat Can Take You. And make sure to share this with a friend or a colleague because it really helps us connect with other physicians who want to move abroad but just don't know how.